to successful strategic commissioning. This is really just to help us talk a little bit further about the white paper that we've produced, which is available on our website about this. Now, I'm not sure how many of you or whether you will all have downloaded that, but the purpose of today is really to outline some of the highlights of that, but also to try and bring in one or two more case study bits of information that we've got around that. So strategic commissioning, or if you prefer, outsourcing. What I just want us to just do is, obviously, every good talk starts with an agenda. So just so we know where we're going, we're looking to spend about 30 minutes, and then any questions that you may have, please feel free to use the question interaction box that you've got with GoToWebinar and ask any questions. Online also with me today is Steve Chains. Steve will be monitoring all of that and enabling me to pick that up if I'm just rattling on, because I can't see those questions as they come in. But we're going to just do a quick introduction. We'll look at some of the benefits and some of the issues, and then we'll go through what we think are the 5 steps to successful implementation, and then a brief look at the accelerated approach to enabling you to get into these relationships in a better way. Some of the players that we're going to hear from, David Barrett and Tony Glue, are both very experienced professionals in this area. You may or may not have come across them in your careers. I interviewed them, but I also did another interview with somebody called Linda Grange, who's head of IT at ICT at South Buckinghamshire Council. South Bucks got into outsourcing their ICT and other services about 18 months ago with the assistance of Best Practice Group. And so I met with Linda just to say what were the lessons learned, and based on the information that we've got in the white paper, what would be your comments? So I'll be referring a couple of times to what Linda has to say, but in the interest of introducing the idea of running video, let's David and Tony introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm David Barrett. I spent most of my life in outsourcing as a lawyer and commercial advisor. In recent years, what I have done is I carried out a review for government centrally as to how they got into outsourcing arrangements, and I was, for a while, interim Director General for Commercial of one of the major government departments.
And Tony had this to say.
Hi, I'm Tony Glue, interim head of IT or CIO, depending on what's coming along. Before this, I was the head of IT at Birmingham City Council, and before that, Nottinghamshire County Council, and before that, places like the Post Office. So I've got quite a lot of experience of running IT in several different sectors.
What Tony didn't say is currently interim IT director at head of IT at Wirral. So let's just go down. When I go out and meet people, they go, "What do you actually do?" And so I thought, what BPG actually do would be a good heading just to introduce ourselves for those of you who don't know who we are. I just want to skim past this. We started out as an organization that helped organizations who were in strategic relationships, who were looking to exit, so distressed relationships. And we started out doing a lot of expert witness work. And in doing a lot of that, we found all the kind of behaviors and issues and related to contract law that meant that these relationships were not working very well. And so with a whole range of services to obviously reduce risk with complete confidentiality. But in doing all of that, we started saying, actually, we can start helping organizations in other parts of the life cycle. So the middle box there is about improving service provider performance. To say, actually, we've got the relationship, we're involved with it, but we're not happy with what's happening. So what are the root causes of the poor performance? And understanding all of that, how do we improve that, get the framework to improve that? And what are the governance processes around making sure that we're managing it right, and also the partner is behaving in the right direction? And of course, all that leads us to be able to offer very good advice, which we spend at least a third or more of our time now for helping organizations to get into these relationships in the first place. So I think we're fairly well placed to be able to talk about this. And we've got a whole range of case studies and testimonials on our website where our involvement is generally fairly short, over a fairly short period of time, but the payback in terms of what we can offer is quite high. Anybody wants more information on any of those, please let us know. But the question is, as a business operating in this field, is there a market really for what we do? And actually, when we look at some of the surveys that look at complex provider relationship failures, it would seem that there's quite a large market for it. Over 50, 60, 70% of these relationships fail. And if you just take, for example, the Standish Group's study, they said the definition of failure was where an organization and its relationship or its ICT provision or its servicing outsourcing was at least double over time and double over budget. So if it was only just one of those, it would still be classed as success. And yet still they said over 70% of these relationships fail. And something somewhere, therefore, must be broken in terms of what's going on. So why do we get involved in these relationships at all if so many of them appear to fail? Well, clearly we get into them because we're looking to cut costs. We're looking to improve our service delivery, maybe acquire better management and get from best-of-breed management from large organizations who can come in and support what we're doing, and to help us focus on the core functions, as well as all other things like improvement in investment and transformational situations, and get greater flexibility in terms of what we're doing. And if we look at why organizations selected the vendors they chose, then we can see the whole range of things here. And if we just take the first top four, reliability, trust, technical skills, cost and value. Interestingly enough, when relationships start failing or we start lacking in trust in our partners, those were the main four things that were the root causes of those failures too. So why do we bother to outsource? What are the issues? Well, the issues are many and various. And of course, we'll just look at a few of these because we're strapped for time, really. But at the high level is, initially when you get into these relationships, there are a lot of quick wins. But these quick wins can shroud and hide a whole range of more deep-seated issues. What are the quick wins? Well, of course, the new partner is going to come in and give us some major capital investment. We can get new systems in quickly and easily. We're going to have a whole lot of resource focused on what our service is trying to provide. So we're going to get a whole surge of activity around these improvements. And of course, there's a whole lot of good PR comes around that in the short term. The problem is, it is often in the short term. And as the honeymoon period we come out of the honeymoon period, maybe 1-2 years into the relationship, some more deep-seated issues start to come out. Some of these may be around the fact that our expertise, in-house expertise, has moved to the provider. But often what happens is, as the services are moved from in-house delivery to being commissioned to the service provider, they're happening because there was a problem in the first place. And what we're trying to do is just move the problem somewhere else. But the problems haven't necessarily gone away. Something I'm going to come on to a little bit later is this whole lack of innovation. We feel as if the partner is losing focus. We're no longer getting the investment and changes in our business processes, which we think we wanted in the first place. The fault can be on both parties. It's not just on the partner. And therefore, what we end up is a lack of true partnership. We don't feel as if they're actually working alongside us. We get into an us and them situation where we feel as if culturally and actually we're pulling in different directions. I just did a bit of an untidy slide here. I noticed a report recently, which is, I've got the link there, and if anybody wants the link, it's a useful little website called Outsourcer. And there was a whole article linked to this, and it said a study conducted by The Guardian reported that the majority of local authority staff were not trained enough to effectively commission public services. Despite this, there's been a recent shift in the sector towards becoming commissioning councils. And of course, we think that's quite interesting. We think that actually the ability to manage it, the skills that are required to manage a service, to manage an in-house delivery, are very different to those that are involved in both selecting and getting into a relationship and managing that vendor management relationship as it moves forward. And there's a whole area there's a gap there in terms of the skills that we see as well as we go around the country. So what are the 5 steps to establishing a healthy strategic commissioning partnership? Well, very quickly, I've laid them out there. Defining the outcomes, establishing the remit, drafting your requirements, contract negotiation, and then ultimately into the implementation and transition of your services to the partner that you selected. So let's look at them in turn, defining the outcomes. A study by Technorati showed that 85% of commissioning contracts will be renegotiated due to contract terms being inadequate for medium or long-term objectives. And it's these objectives that we focus on a little bit here. What is the first step you must take to clarify and outline what you're trying to get into? Well, of course, we need to make sure we've got the right team in place to be able to do the analysis, to be able to put our objectives in, to look and quantify the outcomes we're looking at to getting into. Oops. The detailed planning and checking to understand the effort that's required, both in terms of time, budget, and resources. It's sometimes at this stage you actually say, is this a project in terms of what we're going to do that is feasible for us as an organization to get into? And it shouldn't be underestimated, the effort that's going to be involved in getting into this kind of relationship. David Barrett, who we met a moment or two ago, we'll just talk about this a moment.
People need to recognize that running a negotiation procurement is in effect a project by itself, and that project has to have the appropriate governance. If it doesn't have the appropriate governance, management of stakeholders, communication, you actually get yourself into a situation where you negotiate something that's rather good that does not suit the organization as a whole. I remember working with DEFRA a few years back, and we set up actually an extraordinarily innovative deal. I advised them to go down this direction. It was, in many ways, a very innovative strategic partnership, perhaps one of the best I've ever seen done in the public sector. The thing I didn't realize, because I was actually involved in the negotiations process, and indeed it wasn't really my responsibility, that this was not being sold properly to the stakeholders. They didn't understand it. They didn't actually, when push came to shove, and the deal had been signed, it wasn't something that they necessarily wanted, but more important, that it wasn't something that they could necessarily relate to and manage. And what was an extremely innovative deal that would have improved development services significantly there, drifted into trouble from a very early time.
Which brings us on to point 2, establishing the commissioning remit. Again, in a study by Technorati, 58% of organizations was found to lack the robust processes for specifying the remit of the service or department they wanted to commission. And it is of vital importance that a clear remit of services is outlined, detailing the level of expertise that you will rely upon from your partner and what service levels you believe are necessary in order for the service to be delivered effectively. But in doing that, we should describe very much the what and not the how. So we're looking at what the outcome is, and we're not specifying how they should deliver that service, because they are the experts. And we'll look at that in a moment or two in more detail. And we have other guides which relate very much to the role of the expert provider. But the service outcomes and the benefits you want your partner to achieve. And in doing all of this, we should avoid ambiguity. In other words, we should ensure that we understand that the operational processes for each of the functions you want to commission are included in your requirements. Again, what service levels you're looking for. The innovation that you're looking to seek. And of course, when we're looking to seek innovation, these are one of the 2 major complaints that organizations have when they get into it. Your service must absolutely be innovative. But how do you achieve that? And there's a number of ways in which you can do that. In terms of offering appropriate incentives and relaxation of certain KPIs built into the agreement to ensure that this innovation is kept not just at the start of the process and the partnership arrangements, but throughout the life cycle and the lifetime of the agreement. And of course, the whole procurement process that you get into. Just coming to something that Linda Grange said to me, who, as you remember, was the head of IT at South Buckinghamshire Council. It was very clear that they wanted to get into the right way of doing stuff. They followed a restricted procedure of getting into it. And also, their procurement process is across a range of services. And some of the lessons learned were to say more around, well, we would consider much more strongly the whole procedure of competitive dialogue. We would certainly think about not outsourcing so many services together at one point and in time. We'd be much more focused. And there's a whole range of reasons that she got into why those ideas were going to be of benefit to her. The other part about this, of course, is, and Tony's going to talk about this now, is making sure that you resolve the problems before you outsource, something I touched on a moment ago.
So we have to consider when you're looking at outsourcing solutions for that, to get into shared services or to get into relationships with good suppliers who still necessarily take over all your business. But the idea is for them to make sure that you haven't got a problem, because when you go into outsourcing, it's a very good idea not to have any major problems at that stage. And suppliers can really help to get that sorted.
So step 3, drafting the requirements for our service. This should be very much around what the organization is trying to achieve. So we want to talk very much about what our current processes are and therefore how we are achieving the current outcomes. But of course, I'm talking to a number of organizations saying we don't know the shape of our organization in 4, 5, 6, 10 years' time. So it's going to be very difficult, but we need to outline what a strategic direction of travel is, but also what we're currently doing and how that's happening and how we're delivering that. And in doing that, very importantly, we want to therefore ultimately evaluate the partner responses to see what they're going to say about that. So we need a response mechanism that allows them to respond to how they will achieve these outcomes that we're looking for, including detailed information about what staff they're looking to 2P across maybe. And the whole area of size and culture of the partner at this point does matter. Why does size of the partner matter in this particular instance? Because if they're too small, maybe they won't be able to provide the resources we're looking for to achieve the outcomes we're wanting. And of course, if they're too large, maybe we won't get the attention we think we require to move on. And certainly one of the things that Linda Grange said at South Buckinghamshire was they did a lot of understanding. Once they selected their partner, they went to look at all the different other customers of that partner, understood the kind of organizations they were, the kind of partnership arrangements they had, and how the culture of that organization was partnering with other local authorities. So it's what your organization is trying to achieve, not how it's trying to achieve it. And of course, the whole issue of size and culture. I'm just going to spend a moment or two with David Barrett, who will talk about this.
We talked about the importance of drafting your requirements. There's an important point here, not to think about your requirements as they are now, because almost certainly they're going to be out of date by the time that you actually put pen to paper on a contract. But think about what your future requirements are and the direction of travel of your requirements, because almost certainly any public sector organisation, or indeed any business organisation in the current environment, is going to be changing rapidly. Now there's another point that you have to think about here, which is designing a contract that takes account of that perpetual change environment. That's an art. That's something that those of us who've spent our life in this area understand. But it's not something that most commercial advisors, most local authority practitioners have particular experience in. It's something that is actually very necessary, but it's remembering also that we're not in a static environment. One of the things that is vital to success, but people tend to ignore, is the importance of choosing an organisation that has the right type of culture to work with you. That is vital to success. Actually particularly important in the public sector, where there are organisations that can gel with a public service ethos and those that cannot. And incidentally, don't think necessarily that when you're outsourcing to another public sector body, you're necessarily going to get that cultural fit. But what I always say to people is that they should be looking at culture right from the beginning of the procurement process. They should actually have defined the sort of culture that they want to have. And also they should be actually trying to measure culture in a fairly objective way. I mean, there are devices, there's tools that you can develop or you can get from your advisor about how that can be done. Don't actually, at the end of the process, say, well, I liked him, or something like that, or I think I could work with him or her, because that's usually your assessment of working with perhaps a sales team or engagement team who may not be around to deliver it. Moreover, it's the corporate culture of the organisation that you're dealing with, not the culture of individual people. Hence, the importance of trying to look at the objective question.
So step 4, contract negotiation should be part of the partner selection process. Too many organizations think that actually once you've selected the partner, you've got into it, the very final thing you need to do is sort out the contract. Actually, we very much believe that contract development should be part of the whole process and should run parallel to it all the way through. But when we get into this, let's just think about some of the basics. We should avoid costly confrontation. Let's only fight those fights that we need to fight. Understand implied terms. The implied terms are those terms that actually look at what the responsibilities are of an expert vendor in this instance. And those are the terms that actually underline the whole of contract law, whether they're within the contract explicitly or actually not there, which is if they're not there, they're still implied terms. So it is the responsible of an expert vendor to ensure, for example, that its service is fit for the intended purpose before they deliver the services for you. So it is their responsibility to ensure that they can deliver it. And you need to make sure that you give them the opportunity to understand what your service is trying to achieve, what the outcomes are that you're trying to get to. And it is their responsibility to ensure fit for purpose. They must validate your requirements prior to them accepting the project. If challenges arise during the delivery of the services, they cannot state in a later date that your pre-contractual requirements were ambiguous in any way. And they also cannot expect you to be responsible for being able to validate whether its service is appropriate for your requirements. So you're not validating whether they're good for you, they're validating whether they can deliver what you require. And they cannot contract out of being responsible for this advice later on. And there's one or two other issues as well that come into that. But let's just get on to move on. The onus to establish and maintain working relationships is very key on both parties. This is going to be a relationship that's going to last a number of years. And these working relationships need to work for you. So we just talked a moment or two about the implied obligations and the implied terms of the contract. Therefore, one of the things we talk about is contracting for the advice separately, in a separate contract, to contracting for the ultimate solution. We'll look at that again in a moment on the next slide. Certainly, service pricing is important. And I was at a conference last week where part of this was all about, and just touching on something that was said, a conference that was about multi-sourcing with the National Outsourcing Association. And one of the things that was said there about pricing is that it doesn't matter how many organizations focus on the outcomes, understand the strategy, ultimately somebody will come in and say, let's just get the cheapest one there. And that's going to be a problem for you. But service pricing is also a problem because one of the things that they were complaining about, and some of the vendors who were there, and some of the major players were there, said, actually, if there's a lot of risk in terms of what we do because we don't really know what we're going to have to deliver, they put an awful lot of contingency into the pricing for what they're going to be delivering. And that contingency could be 20% of the service price. So how do you get that contingency out? And that's obviously by de-risking the project for them. You de-risk the project for them by allowing them to understand exactly what your outcomes are, what your what your strategic direction of travel is going to be. Maybe some of that's around, how long are you going to get into this contract for? But this contracting for the advice is something we look at in terms of a safer mechanism. So separately, we think about contracting for the advice to contracting for the solution. And therefore, we end up with a whole process and a whole set of activities that enable us to move down that route to the ultimate deployment contract and contract management. If anybody would like that in a little bit more detail or a copy of that later on, And we're certainly happy to have a conversation with you and to share some of the details of this slide with you. And interesting enough, this particular message came across from a High Court judge who said, a customer who does not put the obligation to ensure the adequacy of the specification firmly on the supplier undoubtedly takes upon himself the risk that the specification proves to be inadequate or faulty. A pre-contract methodology which avoids this risk is patently preferable to one which does not. Thus, what I have described as the holistic approach used by BPG is one which is best adapted to ensure the customer's real business requirements are met. And so the work begins. Implementation and transition. We've selected our partner, we've signed the contract, and now we're starting to hand over the service to the partner to provide. Linda Grange told me in South Buckinghamshire that it was at this point that the senior manager said to her, so now you can get on with your other work. And at that point, everybody else takes a sharp intake of breath and says, oh, no, this is where the real work begins. This is where actually the challenges of managing this partner relationship are probably harder than managing an internal service delivery. And it's this management that needs to be beefed up to ensure that we have adequate performance monitoring, ongoing communication, that the behaviors of both parties are maintained and correct, that actually we understand the difference between what we do as the internal client function and what they're doing as the service delivery function are maintained. And they as the vendor have their responsibilities, and we must allow them to move and behave in that way. So these roles and responsibilities are very important. But the key very much is in the relationships and the fact that this is now where the real work probably starts. And Tony Blue will just talk about this for a moment for us.
One of the things we need to think about is the quality of the contract and the quality of the client-side management that you've got. Both of these are critical, not necessarily straight away, but after all the people who signed the contract have left, that's when the contract in the back of the withdrawal becomes critical for the sorting out of problems in the contract. The problems at Westminster were quite complex. There was an outsourced contract in place. The supplier had lost focus on Westminster, and Westminster themselves had not given the client-side staff sufficient resources to address these problems. So because of bad operation in Westminster and lack of interest by the supplier, the contract wasn't delivering the most simple of things. This was evidence within 3 weeks of us joining them. A sound failure caused some systems around for 8 days, just due to the lack of focus of what should have been happening by the outsourcer on the client side.
Just before we leave, Tony, he did want to say something a little bit about the differences and the importance of shared service, which I know is quite important to a number of people this morning.
Okay, shared services is one of the options that you look at these days when you might previously be just looking at outsourcing. The shared services has got some great advantages. First thing is, it's within the family. It's local authorities talking to each other. And this takes matters of pressure off, but it doesn't take away from having a clear memorandum of understanding and understanding how shared services work. The benefits come by sharing the services. So you've got to work out which services you're going to share. This is utterly critical to get that in your head and not to worry about the shared services that you're not going to share. And the same thing applies as for outsourcing. You must have a very strong client side to make sure that when you commission the shared service, it is meeting the needs of the customers. So shared services is different, and you can be much more relaxed about the problems that you might have. With a private contract, you can't have problems which are still taxed by the contract. With shared services, you can move at a different pace and leave some things behind and put other things in, provided you've got a strong client side.
Okay, so just moving into the finale, as it were, how to accelerate your approach. In the guide, in the white paper that we've got a different kind of graphic for this, but it didn't look too good. So I've kind of redrawn it a little bit to say, actually, moving through, what we've been talking about is how you start enabling yourself with a framework approach to move through the delivery. So ultimately, you get to the alignment of your financial benefits and the outcomes. And it's this framework which can considerably accelerate the timescales to achieve the beneficial outcomes and reduce the risk of service integration or private sector commissioning, and ultimately lead to the significant reductions in your service delivery costs. So it's making sure that you do understand how you get from the start, where you identify the challenges and what is the shortest route to the effectiveness, all the way through all the different stages to achieve what we want to achieve. I mentioned that we have a number of guides on our website, so just in wrapping up, and obviously we've been talking about the strategic commissioning paper today, but there's a whole range of other white papers and guides which are available on our website in terms of the strategic vendor responsibilities, successful multi-sourcing, specifics around adult social care, where we've worked with 1 or 2 authorities around creating those. People are looking at creating, getting contracts into the cloud, and we're starting to create 1 or 2 bits of information around the G Cloud as well. But fundamentally, of course, we've been talking about strategic commissioning this morning. I'm going to ask Steve. We've got 1 or 2 questions. I'm just wondering if we do have any questions. Steve, I don't know if you're still able to hear me. I hope everybody has been able to hear me this morning. And I'm looking at any questions.
Yeah. Hi, Peter.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad I've been.
We've got one question here.
I don't know if you want to put the poll out now, Steve. That might be a question for people, just to try and get an idea when people come onto these webinars of the reasons why, whether it's just a general interest or specific interest. Feel free to respond or not. And this is not a 3-line whip as a contractual term for being on the webinar this morning. But I don't know if you can handle that, Steve.
Yes, I've just put out the poll, so if you give me maybe a few seconds to reply, and then we'll close that.
Yeah, and are there any other questions that people have?
I've got one question here, yep, but if anyone else has got any more, please put your hand up or in the chat box or the question box.
Yep. What's the question?
Okay, the question is, someone's asking about a previous ICT managed service that they had, and we had some problems with their vendor. And the vendor had come back saying their requirements had changed halfway through the contract, and they're asking how would they avoid this happening in the future?
I think one of those areas we talked about, there's a number of things in terms of there's 2 sides to it really. One is actually making sure the procurement mechanism is correct, and so we talked a little bit about the implied terms and the roles of the expert vendor. Actually, in some instances, vendors should really be understanding what our requirements are, and if we contract separately for the advice to the contract itself, to the solution, then they won't be able to do that. One of the things we then do is that the document that is created by the A team, we contract separately for the advice. There's a number of benefits. Sorry, I'm going around in circles here. But one of the benefits is you don't get the sales team coming to try and sell to you their service. You actually contract for their A team to come in, the consultants themselves to come in and understand your business. And if they do that, then the document that they produce at the end of that can be spun into the contract for the solution at the end of the day. Therefore, they are not in a position to say that we shouldn't, that our issues have changed, because it's their advice and their partnership throughout the time of it where we can get into a much safer contractual position. But the other part of that is also about when we create our requirements information, is being very clear that we don't start saying how we're going to do things. So we can start saying, this is what the outcome is, and therefore how we do things and how they get there is up to them as an expert vendor. I hope that's answered the question a little bit. But in specifics, it's very difficult to say. One of the things we do when these situations arise and we're asked to come in and do a piece of work around realigning projects because they are going off the rails, is we need to do some kind of discovery phase. We need to try and say, okay, what is happening? What is the situation? Let's understand what that is from the outset. See what the original contract said, see what the original document said, and actually see what the behaviors have been in the intervening time. Steve, over to you. Anything else anybody wants to ask?
No, that's it for the questions, Peter. I'll just close this poll because it looks like everybody's hands in as well.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody? Is it Bethan with a hand up? I can't see that. Bethan Edwards at Denbighshire. Have you got a question, Bethan? Can we allow Bethan to speak here? Okay, I can't hear anything. If you do have any other questions, please come back to us and let us know. I hope you've enjoyed this morning's webinar. If you do have any questions or you'd like to have a copy of the webinar for a colleague, we have recorded it. If it's good enough, we'll send it on to you. And if the quality is not good enough, we'll sort something else out. But thanks very much indeed for joining us, everybody, this morning. And I hope the rest of the day goes really well for you. Thank you.